All right, I'm gonna call on response type cat. How's everybody doing? All right. Welcome to the final panel in the Staff and Students of Social Justice speaker series. We're really excited. Before I get into that, though, I want us to hand it over to the people from the Multicultural Center to acknowledge where we are and what's going on. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Hamail. I use she, her pronouns. At the beginning of every event in this space, we just like to do a land acknowledgement. So we'd like to thank the Native Student Development for drafting this statement. We recognize that Berkeley sits on the territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, and we will work to hold University of California, Berkeley more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous people. I'll just hand it off to Rita to talk about a little bit the history of the space.
Hi everyone, my name is Rita, like Hamal said, and I also use she, her pronouns. So the Multicultural Community Center is rooted in the legacy of TWLF, the Third World Liberation Front, a student of color movement led by the Black Student Union at SF State, who demanded a space and place for Black students at their university. The fervor spread to Berkeley, fronted again by Black students, and in 1969, various students of color organizations came to strike and called for a third world college. The want and need to have our stories told, remembered, and shared by us, for us, were rattling the university. After a 3-month-long strike, the Department of Ethnic Studies was created. Voices were once again made heard in 1999 when Black, Indigenous, and students of color entered into a week-long hunger strike, and from this struggle came the MCC and other center focused on BIPOC stories. As we move forward, we carry the core values of the MCC, student-led, anti-oppression, cross-cultural understanding and oppression, sustainability and wellness, popular education, and social justice in our continued struggles for a reimagined future. So yeah, this is the MCC. I was gonna go into like things we provide if anyone wants to.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We usually like have some interns at the front desk, and anyone usually stops by. You can ask for free printing, testing materials, menstrual products or safe sex products. You can also go towards the back where I think some of you guys got the food. There's like water and like tea. Occasionally we'll have like food in the back, so you can always stop by and ask an intern at the front desk if you ever like want a meal or some snacks, and they can take you to the back. But yeah.
We're open to anyone, not just people who are affiliated with UC Berkeley. So even if you're just a community member, feel free to stop by. And yeah, if you want resources that we don't have, we're more than happy to try to connect you with anyone who can provide them. But yes, welcome if you haven't been here before.
And I was gonna say, like, usually this space is like, there's like tables and stuff, so this is usually like a main space where people come and study. But we also offer like organizations to come in here and do events like this. So yeah, always stop by the front desk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, love the MCC. Graduate writing retreats, a lot of stuff. Knowledge too, right? Knowledge production. So yeah, my name is David Maldonado. I'm a 7th year PhD candidate in the School of Education. Again, welcome. This is our final panel. We're really excited as part of the staff of Students of Social Justice, which really came about, out of a bitter irony, right? But of a moment to think about the life and death of George Floyd. And let's not just have another anti-racist workshop, right? Let's think about pedagogy and curriculum towards an anti-racist future, right? A material anti-racism, which really is grounded in questions of what I teach is in the class, which has become the cornerstone with the talks, is racial capitalism and abolition, right? And today's panel could not be more of an urgent question around spatial justice, around housing, right? These are always key moments to think about that, always, right? And so we're really excited. And that's pretty much it, yeah. I was not prepared because Victoria is not feeling well today, so I'm calling it out. Welcome everyone on Zoom. We got a lot of people on Zoom. We're really excited about that. And so, yeah, without further ado, I'm going to get out the way. Y'all didn't come here to see me. And let y'all do your thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to Housing Rights and Spatial Justice Making. My name is Juleon Robinson, and I'm a third-year PhD student in the Geography Department here at Berkeley. My own research explores the antagonisms between Blackness and private property within regimes of racial capitalism. My current project interrogates the role of the Bay Area's public housing policy in the ongoing fragmentation of Black geographies in Richmond, California. I also have a background as a tenant organizer in New York and here in Oakland. So needless to say, I'm very excited about the opportunity to moderate this panel today. Each one of our panelists is engaged in critical work on the roots of the contemporary housing crisis in the Bay Area. Their work interrogates the assumptions baked into the normative and dominant housing policy in order to highlight its limitations for addressing the acute needs of those in the margins, from Black mothers to LGBTQ youth. As such, our conversation today will revolve around the relationship between rights and justice, and the power and possibilities that emerge from committed community organizing. And so with that, I'll introduce our panelists today. To my left here first, we have Dr. Brandi Summers. Dr. Summers is an associate professor of geography at the University of California, Berkeley, and author of Black in Place, The Spatial Aesthetics of Race in a Post-Chocolate City. Her research examines the relationship between and function of race, space, urban infrastructure, and architecture. Her current research includes a book project that examines representations and experiences of space, place, and landscape in her hometown of Oakland, California, and the Archive of Urban Futures, a multimodal archival project funded by the Mellon Foundation that focuses on questions of history, value, the right to place, memory, and erasure in Black Oakland. Dr. Summers has published several articles that appear in both scholarly and popular publications, including the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Antipode, and Places Journal. Next, we have Dominique Walker. Dominique Walker is a mother who fights, organizes, and works for change. She co-founded her high school, the School of Social Justice and Community Development. She earned her BA degree in sociology from Tougaloo College. Dominique worked and supervised the lactation program at Jackson Hines Comprehensive Health Center in Jackson, Mississippi. She also co-founded Moms for Housing, M4H. A group of mothers fighting for housing and against speculation in communities. Dominique is currently on the board of directors for Moms for Housing, and she is an active member of the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, or ACE's Black Housing Union, and an elected member of the Berkeley Rent Stabilization Board. She is the educator of community organizing for the Deep Medicine Circle, a woman of color-led, worker-directed nonprofit organization that is committed to heal the wounds of colonialism through food, medicine, restoration, story, and learning. Dominique is committed to fighting for justice at the intersection of housing and Black maternal health, and she is currently a student at Berkeley City College. Woo! And down at the far end, we have Dr. Colette Auerswald. Dr. Colette Auerswald is a pediatrician and specialist in adolescent and young adult medicine and professor of community health sciences at Berkeley Public Health. She is the co-director and co-founder of I4Y, or Innovations for Youth, a collaborative academic community hub focused on improving youth well-being through structural change. For the last 26 years, she has studied the social determinants of well-being among historically marginalized youth, particularly youth experiencing homelessness in California. She is committed to work with communities in ways that prioritize youth voice and youth partnership for research that informs equity building policies. All right, and with that, we can get started. I have some questions here, but as our panelists are conversing, please let it marinate and generate some questions from the audience, and we'll take them at the end. So I thought it made sense to, before we really dive in, hear how you all think about housing justice. It's a pretty capacious term, but I think we'd all love to hear first what housing justice means to you in the context of your work, and how does it extend past the basic need for shelter?
We're just going in.
Yeah, maybe we can go down, or I don't know who wants to jump in.
Go ahead. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Juleon for moderating. And I also want to thank Doug and Victoria for the invitation and for gathering us all. I've never been here before, so it's nice to be here. So now I know where to come, and I don't even come on this side of the campus, so now I'm gonna come down here and visit. So it's a really good question because I think so often we make assumptions about what terms mean, and we kind of use them haphazardly sometimes. So in thinking about housing justice, you have to imagine that there is something called injustice that's related to housing as well. And so when I think about housing justice, I automatically think about affordability, because generally speaking, if a home is not affordable, then how can you feel safe and secure and loved in that space, right? And so as it relates to what's affordable, it also has to be safe. It also has to be spacious enough for your family, right? And I think for so many of us, as Julie mentioned, I'm from Oakland, and so we had multiple generations living in my house. So my home is not just my mother and father and or whoever. It's my grandmother, it was an aunt, it was a cousin, it was my parents, it was my stepdad, so there were a number of people. So when I think about housing justice, it means we open up our designation of what family means. We open up our designation of what home can mean, and also just the affordability. And so it's working towards that. Working towards having the ability to live fully and not necessarily accumulate just because you're trying to increase your wealth or get more things. So,
as moms for housing, when I think about justice, housing justice, I think about our end goal, which is housing as a human right, and the strategies that we use to get there. And it's not just one strategy, it's on all sides. It's legislatively, it's on the ground every day, the work that we're doing. That I guess that is my definition of like housing justice as it relates to our end goal.
mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone. I'm really super honored to be here. So thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, David. Thank you, Victoria. I'll be honest that I was most excited about getting to sit next to Dominique because I've been like fangirling Dominique for a while. And so now we get to talk. So I'm just like really happy right now. Even if we like stop, I'm like, yes, this is a win. So that's just being honest. So when I think about housing justice and the injustice tied to it, I think about the injustices that youth experiencing homelessness experience. Because they actually experience an intersectional injustice. You'd think that if they're a youth experiencing homelessness, that wow, they should get like all that extra attention. But actually, when people are planning the needs of youth who are experiencing homelessness don't get addressed because it's like, oh wow, that's like too much, or they can't really be helped, or they've chosen it, or all other kind of stigmatizing blankety blank statements that people make about folks. And then among people experiencing homelessness, youth get left out completely, as do families. So families and youth get left out because of, and important, I'm not saying we don't need to focus on single adults. We totally need to focus on single adults. We just need to include everyone else. And that's not happening. So youth are doubly excluded as opposed to doubly included if they're unstably housed. And so when I think about housing justice, I think about inclusion of youth. I also think about inclusion in more than one way. And just like for all of us, we all need different places to have a home, and for young people to be able to grow and thrive and become the people that they want to become and their best selves. Every young person comes to a place where they don't have that in a different way and needs to come out of a place where they don't have that in their own way. And so housing justice means that we don't expect there to be one model, but that there are models that are appropriate, and I will say developmentally appropriate without that sounding, sometimes I have people like, don't say that, that sounds like they're little kids. It's like, people are growing up, like I'm still growing up, like people, it just has to be appropriate to where you are in life, to be able to grow and thrive. And so I'm not seeing that. I know that we have the resources to do it, and frankly, we have the knowledge to do it already. And so that's how I see housing justice. And thank you for that question.
And I have a follow-up question and I think you all touched on it a little bit, but you all sort of do work around shifting the frame of housing justice to center folks who maybe are often positioned at the margins. So I'm wondering how you all think about visibility and invisibility, or rendering visible people who are often put in the margins as a centerpiece of your work. And for Brandi and Dom, that's bringing the Black mother and making her central to what you're writing and thinking about. And for Dr. Auerswald, youth and particularly LGBT. Coco, bringing youth into the center. Like, why? Can you talk a little bit about why that's so important, and why and how that intervenes sort of in the dominant housing policy discourse?
I think for me, and I try to make this most clear with colleagues and students, I'm not a housing research person. That's not my area of specialty. What I do care mostly about is Black folks. And so making sure Black people are housed and are able to live. And why that is central is because, one, coming from Oakland, growing up in a time when the Black population was the largest group in the area, in the city. But beyond that, oftentimes we're the ones who, police target the most. We have the highest percentage of unhoused people. We have oftentimes the worst outcomes when it comes to education, health outcomes. I mean, just kind of going down the list. And so often for me, if we're not specific in the forms of care, or if we're thinking specifically about the laws that are, or policy that's being passed to support people generally, again, we don't often get the benefit of being saved, of being offered enough resources, etc. The challenges, of course, are things like Prop 209. The challenge was, of course, in the 70s, Prop 13, which disproportionately hurt specifically Black families. And so it's not necessarily that I believe there should be only a focus on Black folks, because what I do believe is when you help Black people, you're helping everybody. So that's why Blackness is so central to my work generally, and how it's not just about housing, but it's really about living. So whatever that means. Because I'm a geographer / sociologist, I am looking at these ways that it's space. It's a spatial consideration. Us being able to be in space and public space without being surveilled, without being attacked, without being judged, without being called out. Those are the things that matter to me. So with these conceptions of housing justice, my interest is always looking at what's happening to Black folks. And not just what's happening to Black folks, what's happening to Black poor folks, what's happening to Black working class folks too. Because we also have these class dynamics that play into the fold as well.
And thank you, Brandi, for talking about the harm, the history of the harm. That's what I think about. And Moms for Housing, we are Black mothers, and we know that Black mothers are at the highest rate of eviction in Oakland. And through all my organizing, we have always centered the most marginalized. And that's what we're doing as far as housing justice work. And it makes me go back to the foreclosure crisis, because we don't acknowledge all of the harm. Like Michael Marr, he was actually he was indicted in a federal court in Oakland for bid rigging from 2008 to 2011, and there is an exact consequence of that behavior being able to speculate in our communities that led to 7 out of 10 of the population of homelessness being Black. So I think that we should center Black folks and Black mothers as far as housing, because we have been the most evicted and marginalized, and through history with redlining, since we've been here in this country, there has been a fight for space where we can be.
Thank you for that question. I think when I think about making people visible who are invisible, I think about a couple of things. One, I think about current processes that are allegedly making people visible. So things like the current point in time count, or otherwise known as the homeless count or homeless census, which significantly undercounts families, significantly undercounts youth, significantly undercounts people of color, as well as LGBTQ folks, and all kind of for different reasons. But because of historical precedent continues to be the count and continues to be the way that resources are allocated for people who aren't housed in a community. So because folks are not included, then there is no allocation of resources. So visibility matters, because if you're not seen, if you're not counted, you don't count. And so that means doing work to be sure, not just that we're addressing numbers and having higher numbers, but that we also make sure that we have inclusion. And so think about how folks who are most likely not to have been counted. So for me, thinking about youth who are Black, youth who are Native American, youth who are LGBTQ, and why they are not counted. Think about the definitions of who's not housed, and the fact that we don't provide resources for young people who are couch surfing, even if it puts them in danger, and how that leads to increase in visibility of Black kids and the invisibility of LGBTQ kids, of Latino kids as well as LGBTQ kids. So how there's structural ways that that invisibility is enforced. And then how that ties not just to just being dissed, which is bad enough, but not getting resources. And that's a big problem. Until not very long ago, the number of minors who were unhoused in Alameda County, the official number was, can I get like 2 guesses?
What was the question, Coco?
Number of minors unhoused in Alameda County, the official count. Unaccompanied minors, so not minors with families. 10,000, okay. Another count, another estimate? A little bit lower, what the no diss to you.
1,000, 3,000 to 4,000.
The official number was 0.
Wow.
0. 0. Well, how do you go down from that?
Right.
And so when you put in your homelessness plan, you're saying how you're going to go down.
Right.
We can't go down from 0. Therefore, by counting youth, you're hurting yourself. It makes the county look bad. Yeah. So that is a real thing. And so data gets suppressed, and that does and has happened. So it's a big, big problem. I can't talk to how that's happening with families, but the same thing. If you suddenly counted the families who are unstably housed or homeless, that would make the count go up. And we all know that when the count happens, everybody looks and they're like, oh, look, the count went up, count went down, but the problem is that people are invested in it going down, but down means making people invisible. So it's a big, big, big problem. So those are the things that I think about, is making the diverse experience of folks visible by including all types of folks who need to be counted, and then having a count that's just and at the level it should be, so we get the resources we need. Sorry, that was really long. I'm really pissed off about the count.
No problem. And thank you all. It's a lot of what you were each saying sort of revolves around recognition, and a lot of housing organizing sort of revolves around recognition and rights. But a question that I have for each of you is actually, what is the relationship between housing rights and housing justice? Especially in the context of organizing, how do you each emphasize the importance of maintaining and expanding these rights and recognition while organizing for futures where these rights are no longer necessary? Again, I think a lot of the housing conversation can really center on how do we make people seen, how do we fight for these rights within the system as it currently exists, but how do you sort of do that work while also speaking toward a future where those rights, that recognition is not necessary because the system has been dismantled or stretched or, abolished and remade?
That's a big question. So it's a hard question to answer because I think it's multi-pronged. Like there's just, if you take it all at once, it seems impossible. So specifically with the work that I'm doing with Moms for Housing and the archive that we're trying to build, it's acknowledging, of course, what has already happened, understanding a history, specifically what's happened in Oakland as it relates to Black residents, past and present. But it's also recognizing various policies that were supposed to be leveraged to support people that haven't necessarily done so. And so I think as it relates to my role in conceiving of housing rights and thinking about housing justice, oftentimes it's me becoming an educator over and over and over again, where my interest and emphasis is teaching people how to fight back, or at least finding new ways of seeing and thinking and dreaming so they can go out there and try something new. Oftentimes we see, when we talk about rights, it often has to be legislated and then also enforced. And a lot of the problem is that you have to convince someone that something is worth enforcing, or you have to follow up to make sure the enforcement happens. And you see this where the state is able to enforce particular laws as it relates to habitation or when they think you're trespassing. But then if you are living in accommodations that aren't habitable, they won't make sure the landlord, is up to code necessarily, or they don't necessarily enforce rules that make it so you can actually live in a space. And so I think as it relates to, again, my work and my role is, how can I find ways to give people information? How can I use this institution that has a lot of money and use the resources to offer information to help them? I can't presume I know. I'm not necessarily living in those conditions, but I do know I can read what's going on with, again, legislation. I can talk to politicians. I can talk to people at the state. I can talk to people in the county. I can talk to people in the city and make sure they're aware that I'm offering information about a history. I'm offering information about a potential future. And I think it's important, as you were discussing, or as we've all been discussing on visibility, to consider the fact that oftentimes Black people are hyper-visible. So it's not necessarily, we don't have a need to make Black folks more visible. If anything, it's like, what are you doing with that visibility? What is the hyper-visibility of Black folks despite our 20% population in Oakland? What are you doing with the fact that you can see Blackness everywhere, but you're not necessarily supporting Black life? So as it relates to rights and justice, it's so much about what are we doing for the people? What kind of lifestyles do we need? And thinking about Coco, what you were saying, the presumption, or at least the numbers, the data saying that it's at 0, when we know that's not true. We have images that show us that that's not true. We have students here that can tell us that that's not true, right? So still recognizing, who are we really doing this for? Who are we really supporting? And sometimes I do believe what's opaque, those secret kind of ways of supporting people, can actually be really effective as well.
Yeah, Coco, thank you for that number of 0, because I didn't realize that was actually a number. And like you were saying, with the homelessness count is incorrect. People that couch surf, if you don't have like your own space to be, which a lot of people, like that's what I was doing when I first moved back with my kids. I was couch surfing, I was homeless, I was in hotels. There were people living in RVs, like outside, parked on my block. So those numbers are incorrect. As far as like how do we emphasize the importance of maintaining and expanding rights while organizing? So Moms for Housing, I think about it as like our idea that housing is a human right, like just calling that out, housing as a human right. And then having the audacity to take space and to win and to now have a transitional housing program. I think the fight towards that, because our justice at the end of the day is our housing not being commodified. Everyone having access to housing, no matter of their social economic status. That's our future. That's what we're working towards. So everywhere in between, just keeping that in mind as an organization as we fight on the ground, we're trying to get more space to develop more transitional housing, no income housing. And we believe that housing as a human right looks like social housing, looks like cooperative housing. There are models and we want to be that model. And there's models to look at and focus on and organize around. So that's basically our idea.
Thank you so much. I think the way I would think about it would be very similar to Dominique's in terms of, I think it means turning everything on its head and stop having in terms of the young people I advocate for, stop going around and just like begging for people to house, but having it be on the community, on local government, on state government, and also on the federal government, because the federal government decisions around housing is how we got here in the 80s. So youth homelessness as we know it didn't exist when I was young. So those of you who are, born in the 60s or earlier, or maybe early 70s, you'll remember that housing as it currently manifests did not exist. It just didn't happen. And so we can undo this and it can happen. But that means turning the whole thing on its head and not accepting that what's happening is happening and not begging for people to get housing, but restructure things such that people get their rights, such that it is based on rights. And if it's based on rights, then things are broken and then you have to just fix. And I don't think that's idealistic. I think that's how it should be done. I think there are, plenty of countries where human rights are built into the Constitution. And I think there are ways in which we have rejected human rights. We have signed on to the Human Rights Charter, but we haven't signed on to the Convention for the Rights of the Child. So children don't have human rights in the United States. We're one of now 2 countries left that don't sign. We might even be the last one. Somalia actually signed on. Somalia signed on before we did. And they are in this desperate civil war. So it is all about human rights. And if we really mean it, then we don't have to go to court to make it happen. It is policy.
To pick up on something you were saying, Coco, about turning things on their head, and that's something that organizing can do, that's something that research can do, and sometimes things just get turned on their head, I think, as evidenced by the sort of complete transformation of the housing landscape due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So a question I have for you all is also, what did you learn during the pandemic that has informed how you think about the underlying systems and structures that create the Bay Area's landscape of housing and unhoused inequalities? And what of these lessons can be grown, built, and imagined as part of Just Futures? And actually, maybe, Dom, would you mind starting with what was going down yesterday?
Yesterday we were at City Council. There was a Community Economic Development Committee meeting where they were deciding whether to make amendments to the COVID-19 eviction moratorium phase out process and the just cause for eviction. It was extremely emotional for all the moms there. They were there. Moms right here. Y'all can put your hands up. Hey, thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, we were at council last night to speak in support of the legislation, the phase out we know that this is a baseline policy. It's not something that we're even satisfied with. We need more to protect tenants. And it was really disappointing to see the landlords there yelling and just being very disrespectful, cursing at the council members. And these are the folks that are supposed to be providing us with housing. So it's really interesting, and something I learned during the pandemic was that whatever happens in this country, Black folks are gonna feel it a little bit more, because we saw that.
Yep.
And a part of the organizing we did with Black Housing Union and ACE and Moms for Housing is we led the fight to get folks into hotels during the pandemic, which was really important, and it saved some lives. We actually, Moms for Housing, we had moms that we were housing in the hotels as well that suffered from COVID-19 and had nowhere else to go, were sleeping in their cars. And this is something that folks on the ground are just doing. So we know that we can, our city officials can do more, because we're doing it every day as regular folks on the ground. So we learned a lot, that we know that our conditions were already bad. We were already in a housing crisis, and then the pandemic, and we know how the housing crisis affected Black folks, specifically in Oakland, with 7 out of 10 of them being African American.
Thank you for that, Dom, because it really adds good context. And I wanted to point to this image that's in the back that I asked to be shown. It's from the Flatlands newsletter from 1966. And you can see the headline is "Bulldozing the Poor." And in that newsletter, it's really showing the same thing. Ultimately, where the poor suffer the most and first, and specifically the Black poor. And so as it related to COVID-19, I've been saying for a long time, and even in my work, that it's like time is just a loop, and it just keeps happening over and over again. So though there was this war on poverty, it was literally war on poor people. And you saw this through various forms of redevelopment, where they would actually destroy. So I think in there it mentioned that of the 8,000 units that were destroyed, 6,000 were for low income or very low income people, right? And so especially in West Oakland, which this newsletter is focused on West Oakland, it was majority Black, overwhelmingly Black. So the pandemic made me think more about how and when things are considered a crisis, because the crisis has been going on for so long. It didn't just start. And so with this health crisis, there seemed to be this exceptional focus or spotlight on something that seems extreme or seems new, but it's been building for so long. So I think if anything, it's pointed, or at least helped me point to the ways that we have to continue, despite it being over, which I know is not over. My daughter just caught COVID a couple weeks ago, so I know COVID is not over. But at the same time, we have to recognize that this ongoing crisis is something that's intensely felt by specific people, and that through the kinds of efforts like with Moms for Housing, and it's not just it's not what happened in 2019. It's been what Moms for Housing has been doing for the past 4 years, and we have to really account for that kind of work is ongoing. We can't forget about it. It's so central that we maintain this focus if we actually believe that people have the right to live. And thinking about children in particular, it's actually no surprise that the United States has not signed on. If we think about what's happened with the lack of gun control, if we think about the ways that there have been school shootings, numerous school shootings, and they have exactly. So we actually demonstrate how much we care about people and don't care. So it's actually very, very consistent, which is why, again, I think oftentimes you can't necessarily rely on the electeds, because gerrymandering allows it so they can consolidate power. Instead, you really do have to focus on a local level and work together with your community. I literally don't think there's another way.
I'm so enthralled with both of your words that I didn't put together mine, but I think if I think about what I learned from COVID, for me, I think it echoes a lot of what you're both saying in terms of history, and you're talking about history repeating itself, Brandi. Youth got left out completely. The housing, I can't remember what jurisdiction this was, if it was the state or I think it might have been the state. Anyway, it was 2% of the hotels went to youth, so unaccompanied minors or youth under the age of 24, and 1% of folks who were then transitioned to permanent housing were in that population. Okay, 20 to 25% of people experiencing homelessness in California are youth, primarily youth of color. So there you have it. But that's not new, right? So there were extraordinary measures taken, except that some people didn't get those extraordinary measures really at all. And even when Larkin Street Youth Services asked me and some of my students to actually do medical screenings, because you could say, well, they didn't get included because they weren't medically eligible because they were young, right? So they basically told their staff, anyone who you have any health concern about, send them our way. And basically every young person we screened was more than eligible by the medical criteria. In fact, I was terrified about having some of these young people get off the phone or get off Zoom with me because their health status was so scary for them not to be indoors with a door and not in a shelter. So I learned from COVID that people get left out. I learned from COVID that some people some people's lives don't matter. A lot of people's lives don't matter. People were being put in shelters where they were getting sick, where huge outbreaks were being documented. And again, primarily Black and brown folk and LGBTQ folk, and folks who were also incredibly sick already. This just basically was something that was already happening. And then these supposedly extraordinary measures happened and those folks still didn't get housed. So, and then I think for me, in terms of turning it around on the folks who did get those services and this idea that we're spending too much money, which is this concern that we're spending too much money, and so that's why we need to cut back on these services, that's based on a premise that it's too expensive, but it's actually too expensive to stop. So we're not acknowledging the cost of letting people be evicted. We're not acknowledging the cost of what it is to take away the housing for people who were homeless. And there are very good cost-effectiveness measures showing that those are very good long-term investments, but elected officials aren't concerned about long-term investments, they're concerned about next year's budget. But for instance, with youth experiencing homelessness, $1 spent today gets you $6 in the future. I don't know any investment that gives you that kind of turnaround. So yeah. I think, I'll just stop there.
I think I have a couple more questions and then we'll turn it over to the audience for you all to hop in. But I think all of you sort of mentioned the ways that, I think Brandi called it history repeats itself, we're caught in this loop. But COVID-19, because it sort of was such a disjuncture, such a break with the normal, that it made people begin to reach for models that previously had been considered sort of outside of the pale of possibility. And so I'm wondering for each of you, whether it's in your research or in your organizing work, what sort of new models, like in particular I'm thinking about Moms for Housing's community land trust work, has sort of come within the realm of possibility and what that organizing and that research looks like for new housing justice solutions.
I can start. I can give a brief of like what I know as far as the community land trust. The community land trust helped Moms for Housing purchase Mom's House during the occupation. And the role of a community land trust is to acquire land and steward that land. With the research knowing that the land is the most valuable. Research has shown that. And it gives opportunity for folks who cannot purchase to have a affordable housing. And as far as the organizing with the Community Land Trust, also we're working on TOPA, which is the Tenants Opportunity to Purchase Act. That's a model as well. It gives the tenant the first right of refusal if the landlord wants to sell. If it's a single family home, the tenant or a community organization or a land trust can buy on their behalf, and they can continue to stay there. And then also for the community land trust, what's important is that the land stays permanently affordable once they acquire that land. So it's a way to keep the land and then the folks that are on the board are committed to preserving that land for low income, just like conservation does, like wildlife. The Community Land Trust preserves lands in low income communities just as that. And also with that, along with TOPA, is a model. And ultimately we're running with those models, but we want housing to be in the hands of the community. Eventually in individuals and social housing, but they are absolutely ways to keep folks here in Oakland right now who are at risk of eviction. And I did want to mention that from the CED vote last night, the committee voted on it and it won in our favor, but it also goes, yes. And this is just baseline, but it goes to full council on the 18th. So if any of you all want to come out and support tenants fighting for these baseline justices, please come out on the 18th.
Maybe we could get the information about where to go and all that, and that could get sent out.
Yes, I know if you go on oaklands.gov, you'll be able to find the meeting time. You can also join in person as the chambers are open, and you can also join on Zoom.
It is open to public. Thank you for sharing that information. I don't really have much to add because I think really kind of the work that you all are doing is incredible and necessary. And finding, with the time loop, what you start to recognize is that the resources that we have, or at least need, are already there. So we can look at history to see the ways that the government jumps in when it needs to, when it wants to, and has in the past. We can even think about that as it relates to rent control. So a lot of this fight, and a lot of the people, ironically, who fight over TOPA, which started in DC, and that's how I knew about TOPA. But I've been fascinated by middle class, specifically Black middle class folks who are against TOPA because they feel it's a way to take away from their generational wealth building, it's actually a ridiculous claim because it does mean that they're dependent upon an income from basically being landlords rather than providing safe and affordable places for people to live. And so you start to see the transition, and I'm sure many of you or most of you know what housing financialization means, but essentially making housing a commodity rather than something that's important for us, again, to live in and have our families in. So I think using what already exists, I mentioned rent control, because that first wave of rent control after World War II was to make sure that there was enough affordable housing for folks coming back from war. And so the government could take this opportunity to make sure there was enough space and enough housing for people who were here. I'm not sure why that can't be brought up again as a feasible solution when there's so much more of a crisis now. Another phase of when rent control was used to support various communities was to prevent landlords from price gouging. And so it's to make sure that the affordability crisis doesn't get to where it is right now. So I think that oftentimes we don't actually have to come up with new solutions because they already exist and have already been used. we have to make sure we know about these histories so we can bring them up and say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't something crazy. Y'all have actually done this before, so let's just do it again. So I think that's what I've been focusing more of my attention on, is bringing that information to the foreground to be an opportunity, or at least to provide an opportunity for people to fight back with what's already existing.
Thank you again, Brandi. That actually ties directly to what I'd like to say, and also what you're saying, Dominique. So, Dominique, you're bringing up new for now ways of having land returned to community, which is where it was to start with, and for Brandi, you're talking about including folks who've been excluded into programs that already exist. So one of the things that I've talked a lot about is, yes, we need to create programs that are specific to young people who are unstably housed or homeless, but we also need to be sure they're included in the programs that already exist. And so what happens is that young people, by virtue of being unhoused, are excluded from programs that already exist. So we actually had to pass a law to be sure that they had access to food stamps, because they actually didn't have access to food stamps for lots of reasons I don't have to get into right now. So rather than create like a separate whole, kind of other world for them to live in, having them be included in the world that currently is out there, it is more effective and has more capacity than a tokenistic project. So for instance, we do have funding for people experiencing homelessness, but we're very rigid about who can get that funding. And in my experience, the vast majority of young people experiencing homelessness want to go to school, and they don't just want to get their GED. Although if they do and they move on to vocational work, that's fantastic, and no diss to that. But a lot of young people want to get their associate's degree, they want to get their 4-year degree, they might want to go to graduate school, and that housing is not paid for. But so saying that a young person that funding can go to a young person living in a shelter or in a transitional housing program that's time limited with and not living with students, why not pay for young people to live in dorms or live in a co-op or live in housing with other students? Why isn't that okay? And that would be appropriate for government to do, because we need to take responsibility for that scaffolding for young people to have access to their best possible selves. So to me, that's one example of something that's an existing program that we should expand for young people. And then the other one would be in terms of thinking about newer programs like what Dominique is talking about is our direct cash transfer programs. So those are being tried out. They've already been shown to work quite well. So this unconditional cash transfer to young people, I think absolutely needs to be done. It's obviously tied to housing. A lot of them are set up such that you get a lump sum initially, which might help you get into housing, and then you have money unconditionally every month for a certain period of time to help you be solid and be able to have some kind of foundation, so that you can survive and thrive. So those kinds of things are things that I'm thinking about for solutions.
Thank you all. I think maybe I have one more question, but I think we're at the time to turn actually over to the audience. And I'm not sure what the mechanism is for taking questions via Zoom, but maybe if we can start with a question in the room.
I'm going to play Victoria and run the mic too, so let me know if you need a mic. And I'll ask y'all to share the 3 between y'all.
Sure. Don't be shy.
I know, it takes people a minute. So. Yeah, awesome.
Thank you.
Hello. So I just wanted to know, I don't know if you guys, well, Brandi and Juleon could probably answer this, but what is UC Berkeley doing as far as like their ownership of properties and stuff like that to like do better on the policies and things like that?
We didn't even touch.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
It's a great question. Thanks, Sam. So and it was actually, I think, related to a question that Juleon was going to ask, especially given the multi-billion-dollar investment in Blackstone's REIT. So what's important to understand about that is, like a lot of universities, even public universities, they seem to have two brains or two minds that they operate from. One is around residents or thinking about students as needing residential outcomes that are affordable. And so from that standpoint, there's certainly a push from the residential or the housing offices to try to make sure there's affordable housing for students. On the other end, the university also has an investment arm that tries to make as much money as possible. And generally, the investment arm is going to trump the housing arm. And so what's happened with this $4 billion investment, I believe, they are accelerating housing essentially as a commodity. They are trying to essentially profit from the raising rents, particularly, really it's Blackstone is worldwide. So essentially with the REIT, if we're not familiar with real estate investment trusts, they make money based on the rental income that comes from apartment buildings, shopping malls, multi-unit buildings, warehouses. And so it's in their interest to raise the rent so the shareholders can get more money. So the University of California system has invested in the largest landlord in the world. And specifically, Blackstone has caused one of the most significant amounts of evictions as it relates, again, worldwide. So as it relates to Berkeley specifically, also given its history with People's Park, which Coco can speak to as well, it's not really doing good things. And generally speaking, despite, and I believe they are earnest efforts to support the students here, there's no way that the investment arm is going to lose. Ultimately, they're going to try to pad their coffers. And that's actually part of the work that we're trying to do is find out, essentially for Oakland specifically, who owns Oakland. But we can also think about that as it relates to Berkeley. How many corporations actually own residential buildings and homes, single-family homes in the Bay Area? And the numbers become astounding because they're looking for distressed property. In particular, Blackstone is looking for distressed property. We can look at West Oakland and see how much it relates to this kind of idea of distressed property. So to answer, you know the answer to this question. You already knew. But I do want Coco to, let you all know. But thank you for the question. To let Coco speak about People's Park and what's been happening with People's Park in that land.
I can talk a little bit about People's Park, but I'd rather talk about student housing.
Please.
So People's Park is gets a lot of attention for good reason. So I don't want to sound like it doesn't get attention for good reason. People's Park is for me was the way that I learned that the university frankly didn't really care about students who are unhoused and also objectifies people experiencing homelessness and including folks who know better. So that experience of being sort of the we need a faculty member who knows about this. Let's bring Coco in, and then what that means in terms of watching harm be harm and stigmatization and what I call houseism. So the ways in which we treat people who are unhoused as less than human, I call that's just another ism, right? And so I call it houseism. So that's really entrenched in the university. And so it's partially expressed at People's Park, which has become very complicated It's become very complicated because there are folks, including folks at the city, who are people I really, really trust, who want there to be housing for people who are unhoused on that property and see that. And I can't second guess my community when they say they want that housing to be built. With the concerns I have are around student housing overall. The student housing at People's Park is not going to be market rate, it'll be above market rate. And I also think that given that land, that housing should privilege young people who are students here who've been unhoused, but that I was told was inequitable. How can that be inequitable? like, do you know the definition of equity? But I was told that would be privileging some people above others, and it would be inequitable. So anyway, again, people who should know better. But the thing is that what happens, and this is, power does do this also, that we pull all the attention to People's Park because that's a good way to pull the attention away from a lot of things. And the fact is that last year, I don't have good data for this year, and the Basic Needs Center has been completely decimated in terms of its staffing. Even last year, we had a good number of staff. Now it's really been decimated. It is the one place, so it's basically like one or two people are supposed to take care of housing and basic needs for all students on campus who don't have it, which last year was about 1 in 5 students. So you're talking about, with undergrads and grad students, somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 people were not stably housed on this campus at some point during the school year. So there are some very, very doable things that can be done to both remedy that situation or at least sort of stem the blood flow. I'm thinking just as a doc, there's sort of an ER thing. There are things we can do to try to decrease the harm, and then there are things we can do to take people out of harm's way. And there are things that you all can ask for, including those of you on Zoom. So there was a donor. I don't know if that donor even is out there anymore, but there was a donor who gave money to Berkeley for safe parking. So there's safe parking in other UC campuses. Actually, at Santa Cruz, things are so bad at Santa Cruz that when they can't give students housing, they say, you can't have a spot in our safe parking. That's how bad it is. But here, we don't even say that there's safe parking. So we're letting young people, young women and young men sleep in cars where they're such in harm's way. I don't know, does anyone here want their 21-year-old kid or cousin or friend or themselves to be sleeping in a car overnight? Yet, like, the mamas especially are going like this. No, like, that's horrible. So they at least said, okay, right now we could have safe parking. There are 1 million parking lots here that have single entrances, single exits. They could be manned not by armed people, but by students. It could be at least someplace safe where people could pee, take a shower, not have to break into the library or spend the night in a library and hide someplace. All these things are happening today. We could have that now. It's been paid for. The university won't do it because it's institutionalizing poverty on campus. That could happen today. That is not how we should house students, but given that students are living in their cars right now, we should at least keep them from being harmed in that position. We also could have a housing office. There is no housing office. So right now you either get housing through a dorm or you're out there in the world, and you're 18, 19 years old, and many young people here don't come from families that can help them with a down payment or promise them some enormous amount of salary to be able to back them up. So young people are really in this very dangerous position. So we need a housing office with listings for folks who also sign off on being safe. And we also need housing, like legal help for students who are harmed. People sign up for apartments that don't exist. Okay, that happens because you can do that, right? You can just put something up, get someone to come, you show an apartment that's actually not yours, you get a deposit and you vanish. Okay, so people need help for that. And people need help when the conditions are so subhuman and they're paying for it, they need support. So those are some basic things that could happen right now. And I am glad that they're building housing. I'm really glad that there is a transfer student dorm being built that's gonna have hundreds of rooms. It's really good, but it's not enough to try to build UC housing that is mostly out of reach. We have to have ways of having subsidized housing in the community that is also, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say, that also pays attention to the harm we're doing to the community by our presence. And arguably the largest number of people who are experiencing homelessness in Berkeley are students. And so how we're harming things that way. And how we're harming the capacity for young people who are Black and brown or historically marginalized in other ways who come to Berkeley to have an opportunity and then maybe can't finish or can't have the same experience here as other young people because they're not safe. So the university can do a lot around this. I really just am so desperate for allies around this. Yeah, it's a disaster. I'm gonna stop there. I'm just gonna start crying.
Coco, what can we do? You said that we can do something?
I think just basically expressing outrage. Oh, I actually have killed my mic. I've talked so much. So basically, we're state taxpayers here. We are, this is our university. The university says, they literally say that having students be housed is not their job. Their job is to educate. So we have to say that that's not okay, that there has to be, at least if we're saying we're not gonna house students, we house the fewest number of students of any campus, at least have a housing office, at least have a safe place. I think this is something Moms for Justice or Moms for Housing could say, at least give people safe parking. We have money for that right now. The other thing is, if people will buy these t-shirts, I will print them. So the other thing I want to do is to print t-shirts that are in Cal colors and they have hashtag Bruins are better. Bruins for those who don't know Bruins is UCLA.
does have housing for
UCLA has now
guaranteed
housing for 4 years for its students.
Yeah.
And over Christmas break, if you don't have housing, you can stay there.
Yeah, here you gotta
Here,
leave.
you can't. You've got to beg.
Yeah.
You've got to get begged to get one of maybe 25 rooms to live in. I had a group of undergrads who were on that committee. God only knows why they did that to those students. And they had to help them decide who was getting those rooms. Some of these students were Syrian. They go back. Where are they going to go back? To Aleppo? Like, okay, what? Or they're trans and they're going to go back to Texas and get shot. Or, maybe they're pregnant. There are so many students who cannot safely go home. And they have 22 or 42 rooms, depending on the year, with no services. Okay, at UCLA, you go to this place, they have Kwanzaa, they have Hanukkah, they have Christmas, they have a New Year's party, they have food, you've got friends, you've got other people going like, wow, I want to stay. UCLA is doing that.
And so part of it is that they're also bringing in camps and other programs in the housing. So they're using it and they're profiting off of people being able to come in the space during the holidays. So they're using it. Yeah. And it really is reflective. I mean, I
didn't know that, so I'm glad you're mentioning that. That's disgusting.
Yeah, and especially in the summertime too. So they have programs that last for a few weeks and that they're paying for the housing for those programs. And so that's in a lot of ways why they claim it's also to clean or do other, but that's not really what it is. It's to actually make additional funds. And so what we can recognize though, and what Coco is saying is that this public university is taking on an investment arm. And so they're operating more like cities are operating, where we actually think about cities as being places where you can have public services, but cities are operating with an investment arm as well. So when we have these subpar units and horrible slumlords, that's happening in cities all over. The University of California is the largest landlord in the state. So we're recognizing how what's happening on this campus and these kinds of investments in the largest slumlord in the world is that they're really reproducing the same model over and over again. So it makes sense that this campus would reflect what's going on in the state generally and also the world. The other component is that we have to keep in mind that we're moving towards that Hispanic serving institution designation, and we're pushing for more transfer students. So it seems as though it's more important to have those designations to get more dollars and support research, et cetera, rather than actually creating a community that, or creating conditions that can have those people actually live. And you'll see this, especially since, 2020 with the racial reckoning. You'll see the anti-justice programs, you'll see all these things that are temporary, but not to necessarily make full changes because it's structural. This didn't just happen. This isn't a crisis of now. This has been happening for so long. So in a lot of ways, it's changing the language around emergency as it's happening today, or go back to the way it was 10 years ago. No, 10 years ago it was terrible too. So we have to actually come up with a different reality. That's why I think I've been focusing so much on future. It's just kind of like, I can't deal with this anymore. It really does feel like the 80s again right now. And I remember the 80s very well. And it was not a happy time, especially in Oakland. So, especially for Black folks in Oakland. I remember what OPD was doing in the 80s. So we have to really consider, NTC, yes.
DC,
oh my God. So, right, these murder capitals, as they talked about them, and this doubling down of law enforcement created more problems than it did solutions. So what we can do is continue to kind of say the same things over and over again. Like, it become annoying. Just say the same things over and over and over and over, because it has not ended. It really began so long before we were all born. So let's just keep it going. I don't remember what the question was, but thank you for asking us.
We're almost at time, but we do have a Zoom question about occupying space, and so I think this is an important question. Thank you to the whole panel. How can the act of occupying vacant space in a speculative, profit-oriented type market be a disruptive and effective method to ask for really a new way of distributing and demanding accessible and safe housing?
That's your question. That's your question.
That's what we did as Moms for Housing. There was a lot of folks that said a lot of different things about us when we occupy space, like, oh, this is illegal. It was a strategic plan to bring awareness to the housing crisis in Oakland, and specifically for Black mothers to take their power back and take up space and make a stand. And to also show what the new face of homelessness look like. Like, it looks like teachers, nurses, it looks like me with a degree and 3 jobs, still cannot afford anything for me and my children. We wanted to emphasize that. And we were strategic in picking the house. I randomly came across doing organizing work, and I was like, wow, I was in West Oakland. I'm looking around and I'm talking to neighbors. I was actually trying to, I was working with ACE, and we had a program that would give you back rent to prevent homelessness and back mortgage payments up till I think a year. It was a good program, but it was much too late because everybody was already on the streets. And I remember just coming back with like list of, we're supposed to get the name and address blank all the way down, like sheets and sheets of paper. And folks that had moved into West Oakland, it was like, people should be in these houses. There's this house, and this house. So we started to look at who owned these houses, and Wedgwood was the owner of Mom's House, and I actually went down during the occupation to deliver a demand letter for us to buy the home, and they had a monopoly board on the wall. It was really disgusting. the guy, what is his name? You remember the guy, the CEO of Wedgwood. I can't recall his name now. He was there, and I came into his office, and he came up to me and he almost hit me. People had to grab him and take him to the back, and it's disgusting that people like that own a lot of real estate in Oakland. And
Greg Geyser.
Greg, no, was that that was Geyser, or was he the they hired a PR person?
That's Steve.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Steve.
Okay. But I think it's important for us to do this kind of work because it was effective. And I think I didn't realize how effective it was till we're getting calls from people in the Philippines, people in Australia, people in Europe, mothers that were occupying spaces. And I know after our movement, I've seen several other movements on the news, like Reclaim LA. There was a lot of different movements that came out of what we were able to accomplish.
All right, we are out of time. Thank you all so much. This is. I should have mentioned I'm a critical university studies guy, so thinking about all these questions. And I was a child in the 70s, and I'm from West Berkeley. And one memory I have is of Prop 13. And like, I wasn't old enough to understand, but that was like the devil was coming. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's all my parents, this happens, you know, and like, wow, you know. Again, thank you guys so much. Let's give it up one more time. Thank you so much for helping us think about tactics, about movement, about change, right? And so, thank everyone that came out. Really appreciate it. And sadly, this is our last talk, but what a way to go out, huh? So thank you guys.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.